We want to cover a ton with you guys. I'm going to start with some policy and talk about the U.S.-China relationship. What's working in the U.S.-China relationship now? What is not working that you would try to change as president?
Well, I think we need to join arms with China to deal with North Korea. So diplomatically, I think that's something that we have to push for. Free trade, absolutely believe in free trade. I realize the TPP does not include China, but look, I do not view China as the adversary. I don't view them as an adversary.
Do you view them as a military threat at all? The current government
No,
does.
I wouldn't think of them in those respects. I think it's a very interesting time because of where Xi Jinping is, and I was thrilled that he, not being a cult of personality guy, but coming from the reformist government of Guangdong through his family, won out over Bo Xilai, who was more of a Maoist and a cult guy. And so I thought that Xi Jinping, at the end of the day, would want to steer the country in a more Western orientation for economics purposes. And I still think that, but along the way, he has decided the Communist Party is number one. It has to be protected at all costs. So we've got the huge anti-corruption probe and being responsive to what the people want about the smog in Beijing. Those are two things he's pushing very hard. So I think there's a lot to work with in terms of helping him look good, and I think we can engage productively on that basis.
I think we're seeing the tip of the iceberg also in government-controlled economy, and that it's just going to get a whole lot worse, not better.
So Russia's been a pretty big issue in this election, more than we normally see in recent vintage, partly because there's this perception that Putin is trying to actually meddle in our affairs. Donald Trump seen as being more friendly to Putin, more friendly to Russia, Hillary Clinton less. Give me a sense of what your posture would be towards Russia.
Well, one thing I would like to do is I would like to engage Putin in a game of chess. I would love to do that, and I think Bill would love to have that same opportunity. But that said, we need to join hands with Russia diplomatically to deal with Syria. That's the solution when it comes to Syria. Do we really want to go to war over the Baltic states? I don't believe so. And USSR, look, it broke up. Ukraine, part of the USSR. That's if you want to call that a civil war, I wouldn't call it a civil war, but certainly a division of alliances. And do we really want to inject ourselves in that? Going forward, I'd like to strengthen relations with Russia. I'd like to not divide, not have a policy of division or antagonism.
Do you sense that Russia's trying to meddle in the American election? Is that on the basis of the evidence that we currently have in terms of the hacks?
I would say it trends that way a little bit. I mean, I think with Russia, and that's the second most important relationship after China, I would approach it with somewhat less pleasure than the relationship with China. I mean, in the European theater, our interests are not coincident, and what Putin wants to do is not in our interest. And his annexation of the Crimea, while the whole world kind of acquiesced, that was an aggressive move. So it's a little bit testier, perhaps, but Russia has been a great country for a long time, and nothing would give me greater pleasure than being able to find common ground there. I agree with Governor Johnson. I think Syria is Exhibit A, and the Chinese and the Russians have worked with us on various UN Security Council issues just in the last couple of years, so it's not hopeless.
A name, current former Supreme Court justice, who would be your model for the kind of justice you would nominate, and why?
You know, I never name names. I never name names for anything. I certainly talk about qualifications, but I think it's just a mistake to name names. In the context of, and as governor of New Mexico, I was surprised at how many people came to apply for every single job in state government, that agreeing with you, Governor Johnson, philosophically on what you've got to say.
What would you look for in a Supreme Court nominee?
Well, the notion that a Supreme Court nominee would view the Constitution from the standpoint of original intent. Really, today we talked, and we're going to get a briefing on what those words really mean and how we might better describe that.
But it means a lot, though. I mean, original intent means to keep in mind that this is a federal government of enumerated powers, limited specified powers. And under the 10th Amendment, powers not expressly conferred on the federal government are reserved to the states or to the people.
What's a current Supreme Court decision on the books that you disagree with? prominent
I think I would probably dial back Citizens United a little bit. I'm not sure Gary agrees with that.
Well, Kehoe for me is just.
Kelo, the New London case? Yeah.
Is that Kelo?
I believe it's Kelo.
Yeah.
That's the one that taking
Yes.
for public purposes and then given to another private party. And now it's a feral cat nest. So it didn't work out.
So you were asked yesterday on Reddit about something I'm interested in. You are famously in favor of legalizing marijuana. You were asked about other black markets, sports gambling, for instance, prostitution. You didn't exactly answer the question on Reddit, so I ask you now, are you in favor of legalizing those kind of markets?
Well, I think those markets really are states' issues, bottom line, and so I'm not looking from a federal standpoint to address those. Now, I do recognize or believe that the federal government did step in and prevent online poker from occurring. Right. Well, whatever decision or whatever I might do to reverse that, I would reverse that.
Right, but you said in principle, do you think the idea that should prostitution be legal, is that something in principle you favor as a libertarian?
Well, leaving it to the states, and in principle, look, I've never engaged the services of a prostitute. I have no intention of doing so. But if you were to do so, where would you do that? Well, you'd do it in the only state where it was legal. You'd do that in Nevada, where you knew you wouldn't contract a sexual transmitted disease. But I leave that to the states.